a partir de las 8 horas Colombia y 10 horas Brasil, y en el que participarán actores de alto nivel. Acompáñanos a conocer el impacto, avances y desafíos de las tecnologías emergentes en la región. Regístrate sin ningún costo y en línea. www.congresolatam4ir.com. Brasil y Colombia se unen para organizar el Congreso Latinoamericano de la Cuarta Revolución Industrial. Un evento virtual que se realizará el 30 de noviembre y 1 de diciembre a partir de las 8 horas Colombia y 10 horas Brasil, y en el que participarán actores de alto nivel. Acompáñanos a conocer el impacto, avances y desafíos de las tecnologías emergentes en la región. Regístrate sin ningún costo y en línea. www.congresolatam4ir.com. Brasil y Colombia se unen para organizar el Congreso Latinoamericano de la Cuarta Revolución Industrial. Un evento virtual que se realizará el 30 de noviembre y 1 de diciembre a partir de las 8 horas Colombia y 10 horas Brasil, y en el que participarán actores de alto nivel. Acompáñanos a conocer el impacto, avances y desafíos de las tecnologías emergentes en la región. Regístrate sin ningún costo y en línea. www.congresolatam4ir.com. Brasil y Colombia se unen para organizar el Congreso Latinoamericano de la Cuarta Revolución Industrial. Un evento virtual que se realizará el 30 de noviembre y 1 de diciembre a partir de las 8 horas Colombia y 10 horas Brasil, y en el que participarán actores de alto nivel. Acompáñanos a conocer el impacto, avances y desafíos de las tecnologías emergentes en la región. Regístrate sin ningún costo y en línea. www.congresolatam4ir.com. Brasil y Colombia se unen para organizar el Congreso Latinoamericano de la Cuarta Revolución Industrial. Un evento virtual que se realizará el 30 de noviembre y 1 de diciembre a partir de las 8 horas Colombia y 10 horas Brasil, y en el que participarán actores de alto nivel. Acompáñanos a conocer el impacto, avances y desafíos de las tecnologías emergentes en la región. Regístrate sin ningún costo y en línea. www.congresolatam4ir.com. Brasil y Colombia se unen para organizar el Congreso Latinoamericano de la Cuarta Revolución Industrial. Un evento virtual que se realizará el 30 de noviembre y 1 de diciembre a partir de las 8 horas Colombia y 10 horas Brasil, y en el que participarán actores de alto nivel. Acompáñanos a conocer el impacto, avances y desafíos de las tecnologías emergentes en la región. Regístrate sin ningún costo y en línea. www.congresolatam4ir.com. Brasil y Colombia se unen para organizar el Congreso Latinoamericano de la Cuarta Revolución Industrial. Un evento virtual que se realizará el 30 de noviembre y 1 de diciembre a partir de las 8 horas Colombia y 10 horas Brasil, y en el que participarán actores de alto nivel. Acompáñanos a conocer el impacto, avances y desafíos de las tecnologías emergentes en la región. Regístrate sin ningún costo y en línea. www.congresolatam4ir.com. Brasil y Colombia se unen para organizar el americano de la Cuarta Revolución Industrial. Un evento virtual que se realizará el 30 de noviembre y 1 de diciembre a partir de las 8 horas Colombia y 10 horas Brasil, y en el que participarán actores de alto nivel. Acompáñanos a conocer el impacto, avances y desafíos de las tecnologías emergentes en la región. Regístrate sin ningún costo y en línea. www.congresolatam4ir.com. Brasil y Colombia se unen para organizar el Congreso Latinoamericano de la Cuarta Revolución Industrial. Un evento virtual que se realizará el 30 de noviembre y 1 de diciembre a partir de las 8 horas Colombia y 10 horas Brasil, y en el que participarán actores de alto nivel. Acompáñanos a conocer el impacto, avances y desafíos de las tecnologías emergentes en la región. Regístrate sin ningún costo y en línea. www.congresolatam4ir.com. Brasil y Colombia se unen para organizar el Congreso Latinoamericano de la Cuarta Revolución Industrial. Un evento virtual que se realizará el 30 de noviembre y 1 de diciembre a partir de las 8 horas Colombia y 10 horas Brasil, y en el que participarán actores de alto nivel. Acompáñanos a conocer el impacto, avances y desafíos de las tecnologías emergentes en la región. Regístrate sin ningún costo y en línea. www.congresolatam4ir.com. Brasil y Colombia se unen para organizar el Congreso Latinoamericano de la Cuarta Revolución Industrial. Un evento virtual que se realizará el 30 de noviembre y 1 de diciembre a partir de las 8 horas Colombia y 10 horas Brasil, y en el que participarán actores de alto nivel. Acompáñanos a conocer el impacto, avances y desafíos de las tecnologías emergentes en la región. Regístrate sin ningún costo y en línea. www.congresolatam4ir.com. Brasil y Colombia se unen para organizar el Congreso Latinoamericano de la Cuarta Revolución Industrial.
Bom dia, Silvia.
Un evento virtual que se realizará el 30 de
Bom
noviembre.
dia, Paulo Alvim, tudo bem?
A partir de las 8 horas Colombia y 10 horas Brasil, y en el que participarán actores de alto nivel. Acompáñanos a conocer el impacto, avances y desafíos de las tecnologías emergentes en la región. Regístrate sin ningún costo y en línea. www.congresolatam4ir.com. Brasil y Colombia se unen para organizar el Congreso Latinoamericano de la Cuarta Revolución Industrial. Un evento virtual que se realizará el 30 de noviembre y 1 de diciembre a partir de las 8 horas Colombia y 10 horas Brasil, y en el que participarán actores de alto nivel. Acompáñanos a conocer el impacto, avances y desafíos de las tecnologías emergentes en la región. Regístrate sin ningún costo y en línea. www.congresolatam4ir.com. Brasil y Colombia se unen para organizar el Congreso Latinoamericano de la Cuarta Revolución Industrial. Un evento virtual que se realizará el 30 de noviembre y 1 de diciembre a partir de las 8 horas Colombia y 10 horas Brasil, y en el que participarán actores de alto nivel. Acompáñanos a conocer el impacto, avances y desafíos de las tecnologías emergentes en la región. Regístrate sin ningún costo y en línea. www.congresolatam4ir.com. Brasil y Colombia se unen para organizar el Congreso Latinoamericano de la Cuarta Revolución Industrial. Un evento virtual que se realizará el 30 de noviembre y 1 de diciembre a partir de las 8 horas Colombia y 10 horas Brasil.
Bom dia, Silvia.
En el que
Tudo bem?
participarán actores de alto nivel. Acompáñanos a conocer el impacto, avances y desafíos de las tecnologías emergentes en la región.
Bom dia a todos.
Hola, buenos días.
Costo y en línea.
Buenos dias.
www.congresolatam4ir.com.
Bom dia, Jaci. Bom dia, Jorge.
Buen día para todos. Good morning, everyone. Bon día. Bienvenidos al Congreso Latinoamericano de la Cuarta Revolución Industrial, más cerca de las tecnologías emergentes. Yo soy María Carolina Hoyos y tengo el gusto de acompañar este evento tan importante para la región, que es organizado por los centros de la Cuarta Revolución de Colombia y Brasil, afiliados al Foro Económico Mundial. Este congreso tiene por objetivo dialogar sobre el impacto, avances y desafíos de las tecnologías emergentes en Latinoamérica. Por esto hemos convocado actores clave en la industria, el gobierno y la academia de la región. Quiero contarles que este evento se transmite en vivo y será doblado a los idiomas portugués, inglés y español. Por supuesto, estará disponible en el idioma original. Ustedes solo tienen que activar el botón de traducción. Asimismo, esta plataforma cuenta con 4 salas de y mañana 1 de diciembre. Comprenden 4 segmentos y cada uno de ellos contará con un keynote principal y también un panel. Hoy desarrollaremos 2 segmentos. Uno, adaptación de tecnología.
adoption of technologies 4.0 in agriculture for sustainable development, and number 2, digital transformation and emerging technologies for innovation and productivity. On behalf of the governments of Colombia, Brazil, and the respective centers, we wish to thank you for in Brazil and Colombia for the fourth revolution. In order to open this event, we will have the pleasure of having the Minister of Commerce, Industry and Tourism, Mrs. Maria Jimena Lombardo Villalba, the Minister of Entrepreneurship and Innovation from the Ministry of Science, Technology and Innovation from Brazil, Paulo César de Carvalho Alvin, and Jeremy Jorgens, Director and Head of the Center for the Forum of the Fourth Industrial Revolution. Let us then begin. The colleagues representatives of the business sector, people from the academia and citizens. It is a pleasure for me to welcome you to the first Latin American first Latin American Congress of the Fourth Revolution. It's a pleasure to be with you. Colombia and Brazil have joined efforts in order to reflect an open dialogue on emerging technologies and also their impact, progress, and opportunities in this region. At Medellin, we have the Center for the Fourth Industrial Revolution in Colombia. This is the only center where we speak Spanish, and we have encompassed limits beyond our country. We would like to exploit this opportunity. Thank you to the World Economic Forum for consolidating this forum, and to Brazil also for joining our mission. Digital transformation is exceeding the pace where public policies are being created, and we have significant challenges. It implies to close gaps in the social connectivity in order to have a space where everybody has access, especially small and medium-sized enterprises which are fostering our economy. The crisis of COVID-19 made us understand the value and the impact of the technologies for common interest. Digital platforms are transforming the way in which we do business across borders, to reduce the cost of interaction and transactions, to build up markets and global scale, and to give large companies large bases of potential customers to sell the products and services. It is seriously that we are committed in the government of Colombia and the Secretary of Commerce, Economy and Tourism. We are supporting business people in Colombia who are interested in opening these new technologies in their businesses in order to foster productivity and competitiveness of their businesses. It is of utmost importance for our country to move towards digital technologies. It is estimated that IoT will foster this technology innovation with a potential of almost 20% throughout the industries, and it represents $11 trillion and an impact of $23 billion in Latin America until 2024. In Colombia, Internet of Things market is accelerating its pace, seeking new businesses based upon data of the companies known as monetization of the data. And in terms of artificial intelligence, there are three trends. First, reducing the cost of data storage. Number two, data expansion And number 3, the expansion of new mathematical models, which are impacting in Latin America as, according to the forecast, almost $20 billion in 2024. Then we will strengthen the initiatives and regional programs which will accelerate the goals of sustainable development supported by 4.0 technologies. It will also give fair value among all the interested stakeholders in order to face common interests and challenges. Once again, welcome to this Congress and thank you so much. Hopefully we will continue working together.
Os amigos latino-americanos, né, que estão acompanhando.
Good morning, our Latin American friends that are with us this morning. I would like to thank the partnership of the C4IR in Colombia and the World Economic Forum and the group of Brazil of C4IR. Sorry, but we have problems with the sound. The fourth Industrial Revolution is a reality in this pandemic crisis, and digital transformation has been accelerated. The exchange of experience is key to each one of the Latin American countries because we have not stopped. We go on and we also accelerate a set of initiatives. The C4IR in Brazil has been key in building solutions, especially. Sorry, we do not have the sound. And the regulation that has also played a key role. The federal government, as well as states and some of the municipalities have worked. Sorry, we have two sounds in the simultaneous booth.
Nesse momento,
to highlight a couple of initiatives that we have had in this field. Until 2019, we had several initiatives that have been developed, both from the private sector and also from the academia in terms of public policy. And today we have also some of the outcomes. As to agribusiness, one of the biggest challenges is still connectivity. Now, with the 5G technology, this has been accelerated. And we are also advancing significantly despite all the difficulties that we have faced. You have also to consider the size of Brazil. In digital health, we have several initiatives that have been implemented and also implemented in other countries. But we still have to find a better way to play well with all our partners. And also we're going to focus on tourism. We are also working in a partnership with our friends in the Ministry of Tourism. And this process in Colombia is very strong. There is a very fundamental role played by the Ministry of Tourism in Colombia. This means that the relationship between the private sector and academia and everything for more productivity and more efficiency and the use of digital technology is really strategic. And lastly, we also have to take into account the regulatory framework. We have to update the Brazilian strategy in terms of digital transformation. We have launched an initiative in 2018, and today it will be enforced in 2022. We already have a governmental digital strategy that will be cascaded down to the other levels of the are setting up a big network of centers across the country. This all is to use artificial intelligence in health, agriculture, and smart, sustainable cities. So this means that we are combining several efforts in order to have a process that we use all of this technology to the benefit of our citizenship. We still have, why we have to work strongly in order to have more human resources. We have to have more qualified people. And also we have to work better on the community to have a better use of digital tools. And I would like to finish by saying that with the process in the use of the Internet of Things, we also have something to implement that nationwide. And this is a public-private partnership that has been taking action to this. We also have the implementation of the 5G that has also been approved recently. So in December, we have 5G technology being implemented starting this month in December. And the final word is the major effort of cooperation that we may be able to develop in Latin America, starting with the status of the fourth industrial revolution. Thank you very much for the cooperation from our friends in Colombia.
Ladies and gentlemen, honored dignitaries and guests, it's a pleasure for the World Economic Forum to be with all of you here at this important Congress today. I'd like to particularly thank both Presidents Ivan Duque from Colombia and President Bolsonaro from Brazil, as well as our partners, Governor Doria, State of Sao Paulo, and Mayor Quintero from Medellin, for their support for this ambitious Congress, as well as their ongoing efforts in supporting the fourth industrial revolution in the respective countries in Latin America and globally. The importance of approaching technology policy governance through global cooperation and the value of the 4IR network is absolutely critical to building a sustainable and prosperous economy and society. Latin America's role in this global effort is key, and its approach to the global fourth industrial revolution transformations is fundamental. The region has made great progress in expanding technology infrastructure and reducing the gaps that exist digitally. Nonetheless, new and broad efforts are necessary to leverage emerging technologies to build socioeconomic opportunity for all. I'd like to highlight just a few of the key areas where I see direct potential within Latin America related technology governance. First, to enhance the region's competitiveness, boosting and consolidating productive structures towards aggregate value creation. Second, accelerating region's human talent, entrepreneurial capacity, leading to expanding job creation, preparation of future jobs, and as well acknowledging the region's challenging informal labor market challenges. Third, strengthening institutional capacity in the delivery of quality social services to address inequality and social inclusion. And fourth, innovations for both environmental and sustainable development, particularly including energy transition, sustainable food systems, forests, and oceans. Most of these topics will be highlighted and discussed in this Congress. I'd like to share just a couple concrete examples of the progress that's been made through the centers of the fourth industrial revolution in Brazil and in Colombia. One, we could look at the recent publication on empowering AI leadership and AI procurement toolkits in Spanish through our partnership with the American Development Bank, and the full piloting and reporting of these toolkits in the assembly system and the hospital in Brazil. Another example comes from our Data for Common Purpose initiative, and report that we worked on in Colombia on the Moonshot Data Marketplace project, which is released in this Congress, as well as the Health Data Governance project from Brazil, where we will highlight and partner with the recently established Brazilian Data Protection Agency to determine rules on interoperability and sharing of health data among public and private providers. If I look at the broader continent, we can look at the Latin American Smart Cities Hub that's been led by C4IR Colombia, and it's already onboarded Bogotá, Buenos Aires, Brasilia, Cordoba, Medellin, New Mexico City, and the broader G20 Smart Cities Alliance, and leading these cities in the implementation of standard policy frameworks as part of the G20 Alliance. If I look at the application of IoT and 5G, I can point to our work on accelerating industrial IoT for small and medium enterprises. The global community led by CFAR Brazil, this already assisted over 50 companies, conducted over 100 maturity assessments, and working with nearly 50 different vendors to provide support for several centers in the network, not only in Latin America, but as well in Azerbaijan, South Africa, Turkey, and soon Russia. Finally, I'd also like to just highlight our AI for Agriculture project in Colombia, and how they're piloting the use of soil and humidity sensors, as well as drones and satellite imagery to spur the productivity of coffee, avocado, and cocoa crops in 10 small and medium farms in collaboration with our fourth industrial center in India. This is intended to scale globally in the near future. These are just a few examples of many of the great initiatives and projects undertaken by the different centers, which we believe will further contribute to economic, social, and progress on the continent. Together, across Latin America, governments, business, and civil society leaders increasingly acknowledge the importance of collaboration across sectors to shape the best technology governance policies and practices. Brazil and Colombia are certainly among the leading countries in these efforts. And at the World Economic Forum, we're thrilled to provide a global platform to support these efforts through our Fourth Industrial Revolution Network, through this Congress and beyond. Thank you for your attention, and I wish everyone a productive and fruitful discussions here. Thank you.
Jeremy, thank you for your participation. Ahora vamos con un video que hemos preparado para ustedes.
Now, let's move on to a video which we have prepared for all of you.
En un mundo acelerado, donde el futuro nos exige actualizarnos y las tecnologías emergentes nos desafían constantemente, es importante medir el impacto y avanzar juntos, como región, innovando en cada paso. Con acciones encaminadas al objetivo de maximizar los beneficios de la cuarta revolución industrial para el desarrollo inclusivo y sostenible en América Latina. En el sector agro existe, actualmente, una gran oportunidad de contribuir con el desarrollo sostenible de la región, adoptando nuevas tecnologías que permitan elevar la productividad de pequeños y medianos agricultores, impulsando así la economía sectorial. La innovación tecnológica en este sector permitirá, además, facilitar el desarrollo y empleo de soluciones sostenibles a nivel ambiental y financiero para la producción agrícola, buscando minimizar el impacto ambiental y enfrentar las problemáticas de la región con el uso de las nuevas tecnologías. Impulsemos juntos la transformación digital como actores claves en el panorama mundial y descubramos las oportunidades y desafíos que las tecnologías emergentes pueden aportar a la región. Sean todos bienvenidos al Congreso Latinoamericano de la Cuarta Revolución Industrial.
Gracias a todas las
We would like to thank all of the authorities in Colombia, Brazil, and the World Economic Forum who have made this event possible. Now let's start talking about the Agro 4.0 and advances and challenges in the face of the economic recovery. Ivan Duran, the Vice Minister of Digital Transformation, will introduce this panel.
Un saludo para todos, para mí.
Warm regards, everyone. It's an honor for me to open this Latin American Congress of the Fourth Industrial Revolution. It's a privilege for me to showcase here the results of a project that we have been carrying out along with the Center for the Fourth Industrial Revolution in Colombia, in Medellin. This project aims to apply 4AI technologies in agriculture. I personally feel very satisfied about the results of this project because it shows how these technologies can be applied very specifically to drive efficiency and productivity in some crops like the ones I'm going to show in this presentation. There's no question that this is a major step in raising awareness and spreading knowledge about these type of technologies and their application to this very important sector of the economy, not just in Colombia, but many Latin American countries. I have a short presentation which I would like to share with you, which highlights some of the results of this project. And the title of our presentation is Advances and Challenges in the Face of Economic Recovery, the case of Colombia. This project was undertaken along with the IT Ministry and the Center for the Fourth Industrial Revolution. Now we are in the stage of driving recommendations, policy recommendations from this project. Why did we decide to focus on agriculture? Well, there's no question that agriculture represents about 4% of the global GDP. These numbers are for 2018. If we look at developing nations, the specific weight of agriculture is even greater, reaching almost 25% of the domestic GDP, according to World Bank statistics. And we also see that it is a very important source of economic activity and sustenance for the adult population. About 65% of the adult population makes a living from agriculture-related activities. Around the world, about 85% of agricultural producers are small and medium-sized farmers. This is a very important number because we're talking about a significant number of people, not just in Latin America, but around the world, who, to a large extent, rely on agriculture for their economic activity. In terms of scale, about 85% are small and medium-sized farmers. So these numbers truly highlight the importance of the agricultural sector around the world. Its economic and social impact is quite significant, and therefore the question we pose at the outset of this project, along with the Center for the Fourth Industrial Revolution, is how for IR technologies could contribute to make this sector more efficient, more productive, especially for smaller farmers in Colombia. Now, talking about Colombia specifically, looking at the latest available statistics, you can see that agriculture continues to play a major role. We have identified that about 3 million, there are about 3 million farmers in Colombia. 95% are small and medium-sized farmers. This means that they have limited access to technical assistance and education, to the financial system, machinery, and state-of-the-art technology. Other recent statistics about agriculture show that only 11% of farmers have applied for a loan, and fewer than 10% have received technical assistance. And this very important number, 20% of the population between 5 and 16 have not received any kind of education. They did not attend kindergarten or elementary school. So this is a brief socioeconomic snapshot of the people who are involved in agriculture. And this just brings to the forefront the importance of addressing the challenges of this activity. We're talking about a significant population in terms of its size, and in addition to a very significant social impact in a country such as Colombia. And this is, of course, a similar situation in other Latin American countries. Now, talking about agriculture production and about driving efficiency, we looked at the use of 4.0 data and technologies. So the goal we set out to achieve between 2020 and 2021 was to impact at least 100 farmers for 3 specific crops. We focused on those crops because of their social impact in the country. So we specifically focused on coffee, cocoa, and avocado farmers. So we work with 60 farmers, and we have deployed about 65% of the sensors that we identified. Of course, I'm going to talk in more detail about those sensors and that technology that we have implemented. It's important to note that the beneficiaries who have taken part in this project, 5% are about really young people. It has been a priority for the Colombian government to focus its efforts on bringing more opportunities to the younger segments of the population. So young people are working in agriculture, and now they are tapping into these technologies to change the way they work and to become more efficient and more productive. Now, just to show you very briefly how the pilot project was implemented around the country, this slide shows the map of Colombia. And again, we focused on 3 crops which we felt were particularly important because of their social importance and because of the history of the economic activity in the country. We focused on the coffee in Urmita, La Guajira, Santa Marta in the department of Magdalena, in the municipality of Andes, Antioquia, and Chinchiná in Caldas. That's where we focused our coffee piloting efforts. In the case of cocoa, we work in 3 municipalities, in 3 departments: Tierra Alta in Córdoba, El Carmen del Chucurí in Santander, and in Florencia in Caquetá. In the case of avocado, we focused on 3 municipalities: Urrao in Antioquia, Florian in Santander, and Isnos in Huila. So with that geographic distribution of our piloting efforts, we set out to deploy technologies to achieve different goals. Essentially, we wanted first to be able to monitor climate conditions, because this enables farmers to make better decisions about their crops depending on the weather. We also implemented a number of sustainable and post-harvesting monitoring practices, which is also really important in agriculture. We set out to monitor diseases. Each crop has its own specific diseases, and these sensors we have deployed make it possible to have a monitoring system in place. We also set out to monitor the quality of the crops. We have enabled an IoT platform to integrate all these various data sources, and we are tapping into a cloud computing platform. Really importantly, we undertook a data analytics effort to have smart dashboards to help farmers come up with the right information for decision-making purposes. Finally, we also set out to establish a digital marketing strategy. This has truly improved their digital know-how so that they can sell their products online. Now, what has been the investment and the joint product between the ITC Ministry and the Center for the Fourth Industrial Revolution? In 2019, we set out to structure the project. We identify the inputs, the sensors, the technology, and by 2020, we started gathering the input we needed to come up with public policy. In 2021, the execution of this project involved an investment of 1,500 or 1.5 billion pesos. And some really important milestones as part of a project included the selection of these small and medium-sized farmers who were going to be the beneficiaries of this technology. Of course, we worked on the pilot projects, we deployed the technology. To that end, we had C4IR experts that contributing. We organized awareness and piloting workshops, which took place between September and November. And finally, the design of public policy recommendations, which we expect are going to be published in next December. This is the result of our experience implementing these technologies, so that in 2022 and beyond, we can continue to enhance the scale of these projects. These projects are really important because we have realized that it is possible to start using these technologies in Colombia in a sector such as agriculture, which unquestionably requires implementation of a new mindset and new technologies to become more competitive, not only in the domestic market, but also to go out to the international market. So this is the case I wanted to share with you as my contribution to the opening of this Congress on the Fourth Industrial Revolution. Like I said at the beginning of my presentation, this is a case study that has yielded really good results in terms of applying these technologies in agriculture. And in my ministry, we are really proud of the results, and we look forward in coming months and years along those lines. There's no question that this should be promoted because of how important agriculture is, both in social and economic terms for Colombia. There's no question that this sector requires guidance in terms of how these technologies can be used to boost productivity. So once again, thank you very much for the kind invitation to attend this Congress. And of course, you can contact me if you require further details in the ministry. We're always open to sharing our information. Thank you. Thank you very much, Vice Minister Duran. There's no question that the combination of agriculture and technology is really important, and interesting to see how it can contribute to enhance productivity. Now it's my pleasure to introduce the next panel, adoption of 4 IR Agro 4.0 for sustainable development. We have a moderator who is going to be Francisco Noguera, Impulsa president. And Francisco, I would like you to introduce our panelists. Go ahead. Thank you. Thank you very much for that kind introduction and a very interesting presentation by Vice Minister Duran. It's a pleasure for me from Impulsa, Colombia, to moderate this first panel of the Congress on the Fourth Industrial Revolution in Latin America. The topic we're going to be addressing is really important: how emerging technologies, how 4IR technologies can be applied to the challenges and opportunities we see in such an important sector as agriculture. So first off, I would like to introduce our four panelists. Joining us today is Mrs. Silvia Mashua. She's the General Chief or CEO of Embrapa Agricultural Informatica, a Brazilian agricultural research corporation. Silvia, welcome. Silvia has a PhD in applied computing. She specializes in AI from the National Institute of Agricultural Research and a master's degree from Unicam. She has more than 100 technical scientific papers and many software programs which she has developed. And she also has senior or high-level management, and she has significant experience. She is a member of the board in industry, for example, in the Agriculture Digital Precision Commission at the Ministry of Agriculture, and she's a member of the Agro 4.0 Chamber, created by the Ministries of Agriculture and Science and Technology in Brazil. Thank you, Silvia. It's a privilege to have you with us today. Also joining us is Mr. Joaquim Medeiros. He is a technical coordinator at the CNA Institute in Brazil. Joaquim has a degree in engineering, and he's a project coordinator at the National Rural Learning System. He has specialized in innovation and technology dissemination from the Foundation of Technological Research for CAPI in Brazil. He has a master's degree in soil nutrition from the Federal University of Beholsa in Brazil. And for 13 years, he has worked in the national learning system, working in a number of projects to strengthen rural companies and develop conditions in Brazil. He also is a professor of several subjects in at the university level. Welcome, Josie. It's a pleasure to have you with us. Our third panelist is Jorge Mario Diaz Luengas. Jorge Mario is the executive director of the Agrosavia. He is also an agronomist, an engineer from the National University of Colombia. He has a master's in economics from the North Carolina State University. He has been a consultant for several multilateral organizations, such as the World Bank, on areas related to rural development and agricultural development. He has worked with research centers between 2007 and 2012. He was the executive director of the Center for Aquacultural Research. He also worked with the French Center for Agricultural Research for Sustainable Development. And like I said, he's the executive director of Agrosavia in Colombia. Finally, our fourth panelist is Ricardo Jaramillo, a Colombian entrepreneur in agriculture and technology who has developed a truly spectacular career. Ricardo is a co-founder of several businesses, including Novoagro, which is a group that brings together the agricultural ecosystem to facilitate access to smart capital. He's also the co-founder of Agro, a company that manages agricultural assets through private equity funds. He's the co-founder of AgriLink, AgriCapital, and Cropper.com, which is a marketplace that serves as a management system to connect small and medium-sized farmers without intermediaries with producers of inputs and supplies and marketplaces to enable better decision making. So two panelists from Brazil, from Colombia, that represent both the public and private side of the equation. And having made this introduction and having listened to the presentation by Vice Minister Duran about the joint work they have done with the C4IR, I would like to start off by posing a question related to the challenges in Latin American agriculture. First, related to efficiency and productivity, and later we're going to be talking about other challenges related to sustainability. But first off, I would like to focus on challenges related to efficiency and productivity and ask you specifically, what are some of the ways in which emerging technologies for IR technologies can contribute to solving those efficiency and productivity challenges? If you can, please give us some examples of how 4.0 technologies drive efficiency and productivity, starting with you, Silvia, from your perspective in Brazil, then Joasi, and finally our Colombian panelists, starting with efficiency and productivity. Welcome, Silvia.
Good morning, everyone. Thank you very much, Francisco, for this opportunity. And I'd like to thank the Colombian Center and the Colombian government and the Brazilian government and the Center for the Fourth Industrial Revolution in both countries for this invitation. It's a huge honor to be here with you and to be with the other panelists, Rasir and George. The question with regard to the new technologies and how they can help to improve efficiency and production. Actually, these new technologies I would like to emphasize is that the fourth revolution has deployed and improved several sectors, including the agriculture and cattle raising. Precision agriculture has been in existence for over 20 years in Brazil, generating data. We have weather data, and we have data on the rates, several more satellites giving Earth information. But how can all this improve the efficiency in production? The fourth revolution brings in a new sense to agriculture. It's an agriculture based in digital contents with state-of-the-art technology, not only information technology, but we're talking about biotechnology, nanotechnology, and precision, as well as information technology, bringing us several kinds of data that you have to integrate. How you're going to do that and use the digital content to improve the use of natural resources. We have this demand to increase production, the productivity in the world, to feed over 9 billion people, and to improve production and productivity in a sustainable way. These new technologies, since we are generating data, how can we use it to improve the use of this information and also to increase the efficiency of producers? There are several things we can do. We can improve the domestic use of natural resources. When I use technology to use, for instance, soil devices to improve water resources, you're using IoT platforms, I can integrate all the data, weather models, and do anticipations and forecasts of the weather, and have also red flags when there are problems. I can use those red flags to improve the rational use of pesticides and fertilizers. In addition to bringing in sustainability to have a more sustainable production, environmentally speaking, I'm also reducing costs, optimizing the use of natural resources. All these are very hands-on examples on how we can use this to plan things, monitor what is taking place. All this is being used in the country. We also have this other part, let's say, before the production. It is the prospecture of what these resources, water resources, and genetic resources. We have DNA sequencing. Everything is digital nowadays. We have all this information. We have the CRISP technology, and so we can use this, and so we can improve the market. With all this, we can work to study the circumstances, adapt to climate and weather circumstances, and we have also to bring in transparency to the production process. We have examples in Brazil nowadays on which we work, for instance, using blockchain to do some traceability in the brown sugar in the mills and sugar cane production. We also have examples. And another important thing linked to these technologies is SCG, the ESG, I'm sorry, the governance, sustainable governance. We need to have these sustainable cooperative governance systems within agriculture and cattle raising. For this, you need to work on a carbon balance, carbon credits, and you have all these tools that you can use today. And we have been working with Embrapa on projects with cereals, with milk, on design. We use all this. We work from the digitalized data on the soil quality. Then you create models on the cycle of life, production, and carbon balance. All this can open new markets, such as carbon markets and green economy. And the message here is that the new technologies, the new digital technologies are cover crosswise everything in agriculture, from the planning to the post-production steps. There are several steps in the production process, and the important thing is based on some of what we know. We have the second report from the United Nations that was published, and they wrote that just as science and technology were paramount for us to reach the point we are in. We used to be importer of commodities, and nowadays we are exporters with an agriculture based on technology. So just as the progress in sustainable farming and use of device, low carbon agriculture, and so on, were fundamental for us to reach the point we are in, precision agriculture, digital agriculture, the convergence between technologies and the new emerging technologies will be paramount to guide our production for the next few years. Did I manage to answer your question?
Muchas gracias por esa primera respuesta.
Did I answer, Francisco? Yes, of course. Thank you very much, Silvia. Now, could you please talk about the challenges applied to efficiency and high yields or high productivity?
Good morning, everyone. I would like to thank the organizers for this opportunity of being here in this agro panel. Thank you, Francisco, and our Colombian friends for organizing this. It's important to state that the Brazilian agriculture in the industry is the result of the efficiency of scientific, technological, innovative systems in Brazil. It's the result of all these efforts. Just as Sylvia said, we are the outcome of a process. 50 years ago, we used to import food based on science, technology, and innovation. There was a true revolution in Brazil on what we did. We are still not at the state-of-the-art condition, but I would like to highlight three important aspects that, together with science, technology, and innovation, during all this time allowed Brazil to become a large player, or major player, sorry, in the world. Another important aspect that I would like to highlight is the rural credit system that was developed in 1965. Brazil made this decision, improved it throughout this time. And another aspect that I would also like to highlight was the founding of Embrapa in 1972-73. Embrapa, who is represented by Silva, is the Brazilian agro and cattle raising research institute. And back then, the Brazilian government made this decision, and Embrapa, with several centers spread throughout Brazil in several sectors, covering several subjects, works and through these several centers cooperatively in a true network to conduct scientific and technological research. Another very important aspect is the stability of the Brazilian currency with the real plan. And I would also like to refer to a very special date for my students, is the Brazilian Forestry Code, published in 2012, created legal security for our rural producers. The Brazilian Forestry Code is one of the most strict in the world, so it's important to highlight this timeline with its aspects to organize our ideas here. Our producers in Brazil, from what I said, have around 3 million producers. We have 5 million rural producers in Brazil. Brazil is a large, nearly continental country, and it's important to emphasize there is a large heterogeneity in these producers. You have small ones, intermediate ones, and very large ones. Each of them has different needs, even in those groups, depending on what they produce, whether it's coffee, corn, or beans, they have different needs. And there's a difference in size also, as I mentioned before. We must therefore understand that technology must make sense to these different producing groups. They are depending on their size, because the small producers need to solve their own problems, just as the middle-sized ones and the large ones. There's no point talking about state-of-the-art technology for small producers who are working on subsistence farming. So we need to take that into account. The examples, and Silvia gave us a few. I would like to go back to one that I think is fundamental. And as a professor in CNA faculty, and I work on technology in Brazil, is the long distance education, EAD, we call it. In the distant education in Brazil, we are working on that, trying to strengthen different hubs throughout Brazil and the world. And we must once again emphasize that the rural world is different from the urban world. There are many difficulties to be overcome. Access to education is difficult. So in order to increase things before the pandemic, we have 11 EAD centers, and with management courses, environmental courses, management courses, and human resources courses. In the pandemic, we broadened these centers to 51 hubs for distance education. And it's education that will change this agricultural sector in Brazil, strengthening it and making it more sustainable.
Thank you very much, Joasi, for that summary and that concrete example, the last one that you gave on the impact of distance education in order to close a gap between the urban and rural environments. Now let's continue with Jorge Mario. Please, could you talk to us about some examples of technology applied in order to increase effectiveness and productivity? Thank you, Francisco. Greetings to you, to Silvia, to Joasi, and to Ricardo, and of course to all the participants. I would like to start by saying that these words that you mentioned, productivity and efficiency, indeed, agriculture in the last decades has been a clear example of the application of tools and technologies in order to increase productivity. It has grown based upon global and public policy creation that have been supporting agriculture, because we have to feed an ongoing growing population. Natural resources are limited, and that's why we have turned our eyes into making agriculture more efficient. So we are always seeking for efficiency in the whole supply chain. I would like to talk about two figures which are rather alarming with regards to a report given by an association for the soil use. The contribution of agriculture to global GDP is around $300 trillion. I'm sorry, $10 trillion. I don't know exactly how many zeros we're talking about, but we have to understand also the hidden costs of agriculture, and they are well above that. It's like $12 trillion, the hidden costs of all the agricultural sector. It is a huge contribution to our global GDP, but due to the lack of efficiency, there are huge hidden costs well above that figure. In terms of health, we have serious problems. For instance, malnutrition, around 800 million people who are not well nourished. 2 billion people have nutrient deficiencies, and 2 billion people are overweighted. So there is a lack of efficiency in agriculture, in the environment, also, in terms of climate change, 125% of greenhouse gases come from agriculture, and there is a lot of lack of efficiency in the costs of the primary sector. For instance, imports are wasted. Almost half of them are wasted. So we're not using them efficiently for growing our crops. There are huge lack of efficiencies. So yes, we can make use of technology in order to improve that. In terms of research, there are many of those technologies that can be used, and we will use them in order to facilitate productivity, but also to make it more efficient and more sustainable. Technologies like, for instance, pest and disease management of resistance, so that we don't use so many chemical pesticides which can create greater resistance and pollute the environment, and also can cause health problems to consumers and also people working on the fields. In order to deal with extreme climate changes, we have longer droughts. We have problems that are affecting greatly production, so we can create, through breeding, other cultivars that can resist those extreme climate conditions, changing also chemical inputs in an accelerated way in order to the emergence of new technology. Silvia mentioned also networks, remote sensors, big data also have helped improving agriculture in terms of precision, having also an intelligent agriculture understood within the climate change context, so that we can improve agronomic practices. Precision agriculture, for instance, is also helping us. All those technologies are focusing on making our resources more efficient, and therefore we can optimize irrigation, the use of agrochemicals, and also bioproducts, the use of bioproducts which can improve sustainability. The use of those technologies in agriculture is one of the broadest practices used worldwide. A clear example has been Brazil. It is of utmost importance for all of us because it increases the quality of our decisions based upon real-time information. Following on the climate changes, this is a clear example of the use of technology in order to improve efficiency. And of course, those that have to do also with the marketing side, for instance, trade platforms. Francisco, thank you. Thank you, Mario. Thank you. Very clear. That paradox that you mentioned is quite interesting, between productivity and efficiency. Thank you for those examples and those initial reflections. I would like to close this first round of questions with you, Ricardo. Tell us, what do you think? Because you as an entrepreneur are pretty close to these questions that we are asking on a daily basis. You work directly with the small growers and other stakeholders of the supply chain. Tell us, how can technology help us deal with these challenges in terms of productivity and efficiency? Thank you, Francisco. Greetings to all the panel members and to the participants as well. First, I would like to stress that the world is suffering a large increase in productivity since the 50s with the mechanization, or what we call the agricultural revolution, the green revolution. As of 2015, we have seen more stability in those productivity increases. And in some regions, it is even dropping. In Brazil, you have been using data and also good management techniques in order to improve productivity, which is your question. But somebody also mentioned that it's very different to the use of data for large growers and in some specific crops, which are already using high tech. opposite to small growers and some manually managed crops in the tropics, for instance, tropical crops, which are just started using this technology. There is a gap of almost 10 times in terms of productivity for cocoa. There are some growers which produce 300 kilos per hectare a year, and a very good grower can reach up to 2.5 tons or up to 3 tons. This is 7 times more. And it's not that complex, you know, it's pretty simple. They have to be educated. They need education. That's crucial. And digitization is helping us to do that. They lack information. They lack also connection with the drivers for efficiency. Those stakeholders of the supply chain that provide them with tools in order for them to be more efficient. So there are some triggering drives and that technology. For instance, how can we give them clear data, simple, without so much technicalities? And how can they improve nutrition? When to deal or attack a pest? In which way? At what point? How can they have access to capital investment, lowering their risk in loans, because they know now what is happening with their crops through technology and data? How can technical assistance be facilitated and be given on time using information systems? Up to 15 times or 20 times we can lower the costs of production if we provide information based upon images or data which were detected by sensors, or the growers themselves are entering their own data and they know exactly what is happening to their crops and their direct impact on their productivity. So they need information so that they can make good decisions based upon that information. Very, very clear. Thank you so much, Ricardo. And you also talked about a crucial point, which is closing that gap between growers that are at different scales, but also at different levels of adoption and use of different technologies. And let's make available this opportunity because we have over 15 minutes. So let's talk in the second round of questions about the work that we can do in order to create an ecosystem through which we keep on working together. That is, entrepreneurs like Ricardo, and those who work in agricultural institutions as AgroSavia and Imbrapa, institutions from the government also, the guilds, in order to create the right environment to use these technologies. Silvia, let's begin with you, please. Share with us your reflections about how can we continue working together in the countries of Latin America, how to build up a system that is oriented to technology adoption by growers at different scales. And then we will go on to Joyce, Jorge Mario, and Ricardo. Thank you.
Thank you, Francisco. Well, here at Embrapa, we are a government agency, and this is why, since 2015, we have seen this movement of startups in agriculture. In 2015, national technology companies started providing services in this sector, especially because of productivity. We have about 25% of the national GDP, it comes from agriculture. So we have companies from agriculture that have started buying or acquiring companies in the Silicon Valley. And this is why they have come to Embrapa, because this month we have changed our name. So now we have been a hub for all these companies. As a government agency, we see that what is interesting is to facilitate this ecosystem of innovation. As was said before, we have a part of all this process of research, development, and research in Brazil. And the national research of agriculture in Brazil has an innovation focus, and we wanted it to be stimulated. So we at Embrapa started to discuss this with universities and other stakeholders, private institutions and startups. And so we started to develop with them programs to accelerate this process. So we started developing this program to monitor the startups in Brazil, because we realized that in 2015 we have 75 startups in agriculture, and then we implemented the groundbreaker program that was worked with 25 startups, including all the process of agriculture. And now in 2021 we have updated it, and now we have more than 1,000 startups. So this is an increase of 40% in 1.5 years. Most startups operate in the field from harvest and seedling. But we have to make an analysis. We also have the monitoring of science and technology to see this movement of startups. And also we conduct a study. It was said we have 5 million farmers in Brazil, and only 10% is considered to be major farmers, considering all the farmers we have in Brazil. So this is a great variety of farmers. So we conduct a research with medium-sized and, small and medium-sized farmers in Brazil. And just for you to have an idea, 750 farmers that were the part of this survey, 85% of them said that they use digital technology. However, there is a great difference, as Ricardo said. Sometimes a small farmer can have a messaging application or delivery application that was used during the pandemic, of an e-commerce application, can be something that means digital to them. But for other people in the Midwest of Brazil, use bigger technologies like drones and precision technology. In the Northeast of Brazil, 88% just have a family-run farm. So we need to train all these people, and we realize that we have some triggers that have to be better developed. And Joasi has done a very good work at CNA for training of these farmers. Because they get lost with so many companies and technology that is being offered. But many times it just is something that is simple. So this is we have our focus. First, to educate the ecosystem of startups with mentoring, and secondly, we provide training, and this is combined in a partnership with SENAI and other cooperatives, associations of farmers, and so on. We also have a project called Seminar Planting, and we create agro-technological centers. And this is implemented in Caconde, the state of Sao Paulo. So we work very well with the farmers. We try to see the bottlenecks, and we also try to see what the technology that they have implemented, and we work on them, especially in coffee plantations. We also see the internet, because they are located in this area. So we try to create a reference setting for them to operate. And with this, we try to multiply the process and work this with other agencies. And then we expand this process to cover other farmers. So training is very important. Another factor that has been our focus at the Ministry of Agriculture and also the Ministry of Science and Technology in the change of Zero Revolution, connectivity. We have conducted a study on this. In Brazil, connectivity today only covers 20% of the territory. So this is why it's important that connectivity is focused, because this is something that will facilitate people to adopt new technologies. So connectivity is something that will provide innovation to these people. And this is a means to accelerate development. Thank you.
Thank you, Silvia. Thank you very much for those very specific comments about the importance of mapping startups in their various stages of maturity, distance, training, and connectivity. Joasi, Can we have your comments about the factors that can drive the ecosystem? Go ahead.
Well, if you consider agriculture sector in three different areas, we can see that there is a great variety of different rings or different points of connection. And we can strengthen this network of cooperation so that we can also strengthen the connectivity ecosystem and agriculture in general. I just would like to give you a couple of numbers. And then I would like to give you an example that we have in the CNI system. Today, according to the National Agency of Telecommunications in Brazil, we have about 99% of the people in Brazil and 96.1% of the municipalities with 4G coverage. So, considering the size of the country, we have these high numbers in terms of 4G coverage. But it just makes few people feel that everything is doing well. But despite all these high numbers in 4G coverage, when we consider the countryside and for the farmers, this is not really 100% true. Why? Because according to our census of agriculture that was held in 2017, out of the 5 million establishments I mentioned, 72% of these properties, meaning 3.6 million establishments, are offline. So this means that this area, or these establishments account for 7 countries in Europe, and then Portugal, Spain, France, Germany, Italy, Hungary, and Croatia. So putting together the territory of all these European countries, this corresponds to the area of offline, or there are offline in Brazil. So this is why we have a big challenge in this field. And as I said, agriculture in Brazil is very strong, innovative, but we still have problems, as I said. So these numbers only show, especially especially within the farms, because the agro industry, which is part of the agribusiness, usually is closer to the cities. But the lack of connectivity is seen particularly in the rural areas. So this is very concerning. So as Sylvia said, connectivity is a means for, let's say, for all this range of technology that can achieve these farmers. If they don't have connectivity in their properties, everything here we're speaking about does not make sense to all these people unless they live in the city and then they have their farms just for production. So this is why it is important to understand this factor. And we have the 5G bidding process that was held in November this year, and this is for the 5G technology. It is important to highlight here that this technology that is in the process and the frequency ranges was part of this tendering process. But we are still in the process because it's still going to get to the rural areas. And the Brazilian government said that this bidding was not for with the purpose of collecting funds for the government. This is just an investment in infrastructure in the rural areas and also in our federal roads. And many of these roads are the means for the flow of our production. So the 5G that covers the rural area is something important. So this is why this process will benefit agriculture, meaning that the technology carriers have this commitment to cover rural areas and especially those who are offline today, and also to cover these roads. Now, based on these deficiencies that I mentioned to you, we are going to launch early 2022 a platform. It is called Provide in English. This is really to unite rural farmers and the internet carriers. So we just put up this platform, and the basis of this platform is of the National Agency of Telecommunications, and the focus is on the municipality. So when you type a name of a municipality where the farmer lives in, we're going to have a list of the options of carriers that can provide internet services to them. And then based on our devices that we provide free of charge, we present them a concrete case that they can use as a reference. And then based on this, we can suggest to the farmers different carriers according to their needs. So we also take into account the size of the properties, if they are small, medium, or big-sized properties. And with this, we believe that this is something very important so that the farmers can be connected in the next few years. Francisco, thank you.
Thank you, Josie. Thank you so much for your comments. We only have a few minutes to hear some final comments from Jorge Mario and Ricardo. First Jorge Mario and then Ricardo, and that will close this panel. Thank you, Francisco. I think that binding agent of the ecosystem that you are suggesting has to come from a need to transform agriculture. We need to be bold in terms of promoting a different kind of agriculture, one that is sustainable. We have to acknowledge that we are impacting the environment, local economies. We need to recognize that fact. We need to be self-critical and make sure that that mobilization around the ecosystem is driven by transformation towards a regenerative, more sustainable agriculture, one that is more aware of its impact and growing demands from consumers, which no longer want to buy products that are produced under unacceptable conditions. So in that sense, every player has a role to play. Our legal framework foresees the National System for Agricultural Innovation has a specific chapter about strengthening territorial innovation systems. That is an absolutely indispensable approach. All those interactions, those debates, that collective work is done in the territories. That's why we need to promote that coordination among all the players in the productive chain in those territories to ensure they have a shared vision, to ensure everyone's interests are on the table. And looking at with a cross-disciplinary mindset to address these very complex problems with the support of these collectives to come up with projects to design and evaluate those technology models that will address farmers' needs. But all of that has to be based on public policy that has that territorial vision. This is something we have always failed at. We have different education policies and agricultural development policies and separate environmental policy, and there's no dialogue to harmonize those sectoral decisions around the development of a specific territory. So we need to bring down those barriers. Now the numbers, and this is something that Josie and Silvia talked about. The numbers we got from the Vice Minister in the beginning are key. Fewer than 10% of farmers in our country have access to technical assistance. Added to an aging rural population, it really makes it difficult to strengthen that ecosystem that we're discussing. Hence the importance of collectives. Unions, for example, play a major role. They are the promoters of those benefits. They know their farmers, their needs. They know how to reach them, and working together with institutions such as AgroSavia, they can facilitate the strengthening of the ecosystem. Local governments in our law, in our legislation, have a drive to facilitate expansionism. And of course, technological development are still contained because we have not addressed those demands from the productive sector, and we have not been able to bring the right opportunities. So work with local governments is key, and work by research institutions. They need to be connected to those contexts and those realities to ensure the results of that research can truly strengthen the ecosystem. Thank you, Jorge Mario, for your comment on that territorial approach. Ricardo, your final comments on this issue of building ecosystems. We would love to hear your take as an entrepreneur and an innovator. Thank you, Francisco. I'm going to be very brief. I'm aware that we're running out of time. I have 5 things that I would like to contribute in terms of tapping into these technologies and using them to strengthen the ecosystem. First, technology has to speak the farmer's language. We shouldn't talk about AI and sensors and a number of jargon terms that we understand, but small farmers, which is, they have a critical mass. They understand how to fertilize, when, how to attack a disease. They know how to sell and which products to buy. Secondly, we need to massify the use of technology. And here, the state has a major contribution to make. We need to deploy a large number of sensors. We need to massify the use of drones and images and e-commerce so that technology for the individual becomes a lot more affordable. And we need to bring benefits to people who share information. What kind? Well, so that they can make better decisions. I share information about my productive unit, and in return, I receive recommendations. We also need to unify platforms. We can no longer continue to have separate solutions. We need to try and simplify in a few platforms for farmers. 4, we need to bring new generations in. The family, the children, new entrepreneurs, they are the ones who should be adopting these new technologies, especially with small farmers. And finally, working with grouping and clusters, cooperatives, industries, and buyers of the end product along the supply chain, which can benefit from better products from these producers. Ricardo, those were 5 items that are very actionable, very specific to conclude this panel. I think we have come up with some things that we can all incorporate into our roadmap so we can fully adopt Agro 4.0. I would like to thank all of our panelists, Ricardo, Silvia, everyone, for joining us in this first panel at the Latin American Congress on the 4th Industrial Revolution. I hope we can meet again to continue our discussion about the results of this Congress and continue building our work together. To those who have made this event possible, thank you. And this concludes our first panel. Thank you very much. Thank you. Thank you. Francisco, all of our panelists, thank you very much for your participation in this panel. This concludes our first segment of our Latin American Congress on the 4th Industrial Revolution. Let us keep up the conversation. Use the chat rooms which we have set up for that purpose. But now we will move on with our second panel on digital transformation and emerging technologies for innovation and productivity. First off, we are going to have a keynote by Igor Calvet, the president of ABDI, the Brazilian Industrial Development Agency, who is going to be talking about emerging technologies to increase productivity. Welcome, Igor. You have the floor.
Good morning. I would like to greet the organizers of this organizers of this fourth Inverse Revolution event, and thank them for the invitation, for being today with you to talk about something that is very important, not only for Brazil, but to the whole of Latin America, which is digital transformation and emerging technologies that we have seen throughout Latin America and also around the world. Perhaps it would be commonplace to say that the pandemic has brought an acceleration in several processes, but it's always important to emphasize that this movement, this breakdown that the health crisis brought us, really has had a tremendous impact on business. This happened not only in Latin America, but also throughout the world. Governments and companies are increasingly more involved in these issues. And therefore, this is a topic that we, as representatives of Brazil and Colombia and the Centers for the Fourth Industrial Revolution, cannot fail to debate, talk about, and address in the coming months. From the business point of view, a recent McKinsey survey showed that companies have accelerated the digitalization of their internal processes in 3 or 4 years. In addition to that, they have also accelerated the process of connecting customers to the logistics steps of their operation. From my standpoint, this is an irreversible process from which none of us, as citizens, consumers, or companies or governments, will be able to run from in the coming years. The pandemic has proved that access to the internet connectivity is not a luxury good, but a basic item for our societies from this moment on. Therefore, as governments, development institutions, science and technology institutes, companies, we must work to accelerate the connection of persons, people, companies, and things by including technologies increasingly in our processes and also preparing products that will become increasingly digital. The acceleration of digital transformation is an irreversible process, as I had just said. But in the same way as this process has accelerated due to the health crisis, the same health crisis has revealed something really important, which is the gap that we have today in the world in digitalization processes. We have a very uneven process in terms of access to connectivity and access to technology. And we must address these problems very quickly and very hard. In Brazil, for example, we are talking about 29% of the population that does not have basic access to connectivity, around 62 million people. That's right, you heard right, over 60 million people without access to connectivity. We can say that it's not only just a Brazilian problem. On the contrary, it's a problem that encompasses the whole of Latin America. We have still a long way to go to ensure access to connectivity to people, companies, and governments as well. It is the role of each one of us in our institutions to promote greater digitalization of our economies by contributing to the decrease of inequalities in terms of access to digitalization and also contributing to a greater competitiveness of our economies. This is why we at the Brazilian Agency for Industrial Development have been working to disseminate technologies throughout the Brazilian productive fabric, whether it's 4.0 technologies, cutting edge technologies, the same also digital inclusion processes that are simpler for micro and small businesses. This kind of action is what we must develop in each of our institutions so that people and our companies are increasingly competitive and that we are able to reduce these digital gaps or inequalities. We must apply, test, validate innovative technologies and processes and do that in real environments. this has become a necessity. This is the case for a digital BR in Brazil. This is a program that makes it that so that innovative ecosystems programs projects in the Northeast region of Brazil can be tested. After checking the evidence data, we can then implement the improvements and scale up these projects. We needed to start small and then scale up for sequential service for many companies. We operate in a region where the gap I mentioned is extremely obvious. Access to connectivity in the Northeast region in Brazil in relation to other regions is still very low. The digital BR program was a watershed in the way we at BDI have observed the local innovation ecosystems, because the program was designed to foster ecosystems that in one way or another were already formed but are not connected to this agenda I just mentioned of digital transformation. Initially, 8 projects, each one with its own peculiarities, were chosen in 5 states in the northeastern region of Brazil, which, as I say, once again, is a region where digital inequalities are still very strong, and where we can clearly see the very low access to connectivity and digital transformation. These projects in the 5 states went through a filtering process for improvements in their implementation, and early on benefited 268 million small companies. Now, with the advance of these projects, we have reached 3 of these 8 initial projects, and these 3 projects can already be scaled up to serve over 1,000 companies. It is very important for us, not just because of the amount of companies, but for the profile of these companies, and also the possibility that we have of influencing public policies with the right policy that can quickly benefit the companies of our country. 2 kinds of data catch my attention in this program, and I wanted to share them with you. We had an average increase in companies served of over 22% in their digital maturity, which is extremely important data for us because it shows that our intervention was effective. The companies that participated benefited by increasing the digital maturity, and at the limit can be more competitive in the new economy we find ourselves in. The second piece of data that is very important for each one of us, and I wanted to share with you, is the increase of productivity. Over 30% increase of productivity in the companies that participated in the program. Through digital maturity, we also increase productivity. If we think that this program, just as an example to share with you, can be scaled up to other regions of the country, we have a moment of digital maturity that leads to an increase in the productivity of companies and also a decrease in the digital inequality gap that we have seen in our country. We must share that with other centers to achieve this 4th industrial revolution. And this is the reason I bring this example to you, so that we can share our experience, this successful experience in this program. In addition to the digital BR, as I said before, our concern cannot be limited to small and micro businesses, either in the industry, large industry or retail. We must also be concerned with the Brazilian agribusiness. And because of that, we have developed what we call here the Agro 4.0 revolution. We have, as you know, we are the largest producers in the world behind China and the United States. In relation to export data, we are the world's 2nd largest exporter of food. The value around 2020 was around $100 billion. Agriculture, therefore, in Brazil is extremely important, and also needs emerging technologies, also requires digital transformation. In this sense, from IBDI, we have conceived these digital programs, and we have selected 14 products that should implement emerging technology using remote sensing, artificial intelligence, and computer vision, so that we can give greater productivity, greater efficiency, and also disseminate technologies. the issue of diffusion and dissemination is extremely important because all our projects start small and need to prove their capacity to be scaled up. I have very interesting data that I would like to share with each one of you regarding these projects. In one of our projects, we had over a 30% decrease in the use of water for irrigation. As you can see, using emerging technologies, disseminating technologies, we can, at one time, we improve technology, improve agriculture using technologies, increase the margin of producers by spending less water, and at the same time deal with agenda. This is a win-win game in which there is a fusion between the environmental agenda, where the planet wins with the more efficient use of water resources, and where technology for a better production also wins, because companies will use new technologies, and this effervescent, innovative ecosystem will keep on growing, and the producer also wins in reducing his costs and the probably increase of his or her margin. But it's not just this example of reducing water, reducing fungicides. We also have a process, a program in which we can see through computer vision the best time to slaughter cattle in Brazil. And another important result in which the producer's margin improved by more than 30%. Once again, we have to use technology for increased efficiency of the business processes, contributing whenever necessary to this super important agenda of the planet through an environmental agenda. All we need to do is connect the different agendas that can be disconnected, but through the digital transformation technology can be connected and very quickly. In another project, the results were even more encouraging. 70% decrease in the use of pesticides and 30% decrease in fungicides. You can see that the adoption of technologies can contribute and should contribute to a better agriculture, an agriculture that is more sustainable. And that is our standpoint in IBDI, to spread technologies, adopt technologies throughout the productive sector so that we all gain from that. Food production in the country, fruit or even meat, can benefit from the adoption of technologies. And being here today talking to you about digital transformation and emerging technologies brings to light what our countries, especially Brazil and Colombia, still have to do in this large journey we have ahead of us. Finally, I could not fail to mention something that is, although I had started talking about connectivity, something that caught my attention in the last year. Brazil has recently joined a select group of countries that have already started their auctions for the installation of 5G networks. As promoters of this innovation ecosystem, we should observe the true revolution that the 5G can bring about. Because if we have digital imbalance in Latin America, part of this process can be improved or decreased through the adoption of 5G. We in BDI have been working for over a year and a half so that private networks in the industry and agriculture and in cities can be regulated. We know how 5G starts, but we're not sure, however, of how much innovation, or even are less sure about how deep these innovations that are coming will be. New products will come up, new business models certainly will revolutionize entire sectors of the economy. And the reason for this is that we have a technology that will promote greater connectivity in our societies. The lower latency, the higher speed of this technology will allow new businesses to grow, that new businesses will emerge. This is very important, and it is an enabler, technology that will enable us to move on to a new economy that's not entirely digital, but mostly digital. we made an agreement with the Brazilian regulatory agency and Anatel to test the 5G technology in real environments. We did that in real environments, such as a Brazilian multinational called WEG, that most of you must know. And we tested the use of this 5G network and potential use in cases of artificial intelligence, cloud computing, facial recognition, independent robots in the production line. All these were tested and the results were very promising. And recently we have released these first results to the entire Brazilian society in order to show that 5G is a technology that enables progress and that will promote, in addition to new business models, a greater efficiency in the production. We now have the challenge of also testing in the real environment in the Brazilian agriculture and in our cities, the 5G, because we want cities in Brazil that are increasingly connected with interoperability between technology that are increasingly better to live in, whether in terms of public safety, public lighting, urban mobility, sanitation, in all aspects where a greater connectivity is needed and exists from 5G and benefits our population. We must offer 5G technology, the latest technology. We do, but we also need to provide quality connection to each of our citizens and businesses. This digital world needs stewards, and having those people to steer it forward, and I make it clear to you, is what is needed. We need to promote use, and we need to promote the companies that use that, create new business models. We need to foster that. And my point here is that this is important in terms of our capacity with Centers for the Fourth Industrial Revolution that will promote debate and drive public policies in each one of our countries for greater connectivity. We must also state that there are available technologies such as the one I mentioned with digital BR and the 4.0 technology. And I'm sure that in Colombia, there are other technologies that are already available as well. And we must work tirelessly so that these existing technologies can be increasingly spread to the four corners of our countries. ABDIs, as you know, is part of the Fourth Industrial Revolution in Brazil. And we are very happy to be part of a global network that believes that technologies, that thinks that the formulation of public policies for the benefit of society are paramount. I end my participation here by thanking each one of you who are here following us in the organizer of this event. And I clearly place ABDI at your disposal to work together in joint programs or even to share what we have learned over these last 2 years with regard to digital transformation. Thank you very much to all of you.
Thank you, Igor. Thank you very much. It was very inspiring, your participation. And yes, definitely technology is here and it helps to improve democracy and development. Now let us talk about emerging technologies for productivity, technology and innovation. In this panel, we'll talk about the important ways in which emerging technologies can improve productivity and competitiveness of our industry and help us to deal with the key challenges, as well as to create policies and improve infrastructure. We have 4 panel members, and this time our moderator is Alistair Nolan. He's a senior policy analyst in the OECD Directorate for Science, Technology and Innovation. And he will be introducing the panel members and will moderate this panel. Go ahead.
¿Aló? Creo que debes encender el micrófono, lo debes tener en mute.
Your microphone is muted, please. Check your mic.
Yes. Can you hear me now?
Sí, ahora
yes, we
sí.
can. We can. Thank you so much.
Very good.
Thank you very much for your participation.
Excuse me for that. Well, my name's Alistair Nolan. I'm a senior policy analyst at the OECD in Paris, and I'm specialized in the use of digital technology in advanced production, particularly in manufacturing, and leading a number of streams of work at the OECD around artificial intelligence. So I'm very privileged to have been invited to moderate this session, the objectives of which have just been outlined by our host. So we're lucky to have a stellar panel of participants here to address these questions which follow on directly from the presentation of Mr. Calvet. So our panelists are Silma Palmera, who's Senior Director of Products at LATAM Qualcomm, Roberto Medeiros Jr., who's an Innovation Manager at the Technology and Innovation Superintendents at Brazil's National Industrial Learning Service, at CNI, Tulio Duarte Cristofoletti, who's the Chief Operating Officer at Harbor Industrial Computing, dealing with software and hardware, and Marcelo Cataldo, who is the Chief Executive Officer of Tigo Colombia. So the format here is that we have 4 broad questions. They're sufficiently broad as to accommodate, I think, novel perspectives probably from each of the speakers. And so what I'll do is pose these questions one by one, and I'll go around the various panelists in different order with each question, asking for their insights. I think the format, given our time constraint of 1 hour, will be that I'll ask everyone initially to speak, responding to the question for 3 minutes. And I will, if I see that we are going over the allotted time for each intervention, I'll give you a nod by saying time, please, and then you'll know you have about 30 seconds to wrap your response up. So with that, let me put the first question. And this has to do with technological leapfrogging. So often when we talk about digital technology in emerging markets, the idea of and opportunities for technological leapfrogging are sometimes raised. And the typical example here is the jump straight to mobile telephony over copper, which has occurred in some developing countries and is being used particularly in Africa in online banking. So the question then is, do you think that as poor and middle income countries try to shift to Industry 4.0, do you think that significant opportunities exist for technological leapfrogging? And if so, which are they? Perhaps I'll begin with Silmar, maybe because Silmar is working, amongst other things, on 5G. I'd like to ask him whether there are some opportunities for leapfrogging which might also be specific to 5G. And OECD has done some work in this area, which I'll come back to. So let me ask you to begin, Salme, please. Thank you.
Thank you. Before addressing your question, Alistair, it's a pleasure for me to take part in this event here and discuss this important issue for all of us. The answer straight is yes. There is a big opportunity for us to leapfrog. And I recall when we had 4G being deployed in some countries, and some of the regions which did not have broadband, fixed broadband access available, fixed wireless access became a reality with 4G. Some of the regions here, not only Latin America, across the globe, which still do not have fixed broadband access, they are now having fixed wireless access with 4G, over 4G technology. If you look into 5G adoption now, which is going to give us higher speeds, lower latency, the possibility for fixed wireless is even greater. So I believe that across the globe, there's going to be a massive deployment of fixed wireless access to address different use cases. For instance, augmented reality. Yeah, we cannot be able to do that with 5G. We could not do with 4G. By using augmented reality, it's going to be possible to increase the productivity across different sectors of the industry. Another thing important would be artificial intelligence. We can also add to different use cases artificial intelligence to exploit the possibility of 5G technology. So straight, the answer is yes. And I truly believe that 5G technology is going to enable us to come up with different use cases to make the most of that.
Thank you very much, Silmar. I'll come back to you with a query at the end once we've done that, a first tour de table. So if I could invite Roberto, perhaps, to take the next shot at this question.
Ok, obrigado. Primeiramente, obrigado. É prazer estar com vocês.
First of all, thank you very much. It's a pleasure to be here in this discussion and panel. Well, I also believe that, I just heard your comments, and I do believe that the initial introduction made by Igor from ABDI, he spoke a lot about the need and also the possibility and opportunity, but especially the need of the industry, small, medium, or large, to have this leapfrog process. This is not something of a matter of opportunity. If you don't follow this leapfrog, the industry will have more difficulties, regardless of the size or the segment, and they will not be able to be competitive locally or globally. So it will be increasingly more difficult for them to be competitive. So this is necessary, this is possible, it's an interesting opportunity to adopt these technologies. Well, but now we cannot forget that regardless of the industry, and the smaller it is also important to do our homework in terms of a management toolkit. We have to take care of this basic structure so that we can really optimize the use of this technology. So it is possible to adopt it, it is possible to have this leapfrog process, but we have to work on the basic tools of management. And this is necessary for us to be able to really use this technology very well. But also we need to have projects, accelerators, and structural programs, either governmental or private sectors, that will allow startups and small-sized companies that will develop these solutions to allow these solutions to be implemented in the market. And this will favor small and medium-sized companies. It does no use for you to have the technology, but don't have access to people. This is something very key, and this is some of the things that we're also going to discuss in the next question. Thank you.
Yes, exactly, Roberto. Some of those points about management and organizational structure and skills and so forth will be raised now in the next section. Tulio,
Claro, é grande prazer. Eu agradeço a todos aí.
Well, I'd like to thank you very much for this invitation. I would like to start by saying that the theory of the 4.0 industry, when it was launched and completed and disseminated, when architects in Germany published one of their first surveys outcomes, they said that these have to be accessible by the small and medium-sized industry. And in Brazil, we're talking about 90 or 93% of small-sized companies and more than 50% of 400,000 establishments. So with this, you can see the size of the challenge and the purpose of a leap like this. Now, going to practice, I would like to mention my company example, Harvard. When we studied this concept and we saw the possibilities of the technology, we built solutions that could expand in the market. Before, we just worked for large companies, but now with these new solutions that we developed, these open new niches to us. We have concrete examples of small and medium-sized companies that, when they do this leap, for example, in the interior of some other states. So it just started from paper production, and now they have a management of manufacturing control system based on the cloud. And they've been using this, implementing on the project, they went with the transformation, now they have good outcomes. But I also have to highlight that this concept is not only technology. This is also a concept of accessibility. So it goes beyond the solutions. The solutions have to be created considering accessibility. But the business model has to be different so that this can also be deployed. So in our journey in this process, we mapped 8 points of accessibility. They go from the product or the platforms that has to be easy to use the language of the people, and we also deliver services through the platform. So in our company, this is what we call product manager as a service. So this is a remote managing company. So this helps companies that are adopting this, especially those that have low intellectual capital and are not fully organized, as Roberto said. So they can benefit from the outcomes of this, and they can also get users to the use of the platform, and then they can also detect ways to lower their losses. So as Mark and Roberto said, I believe that this is possible, but this is not only technology, it also has to do with creating business models that are accessible, and also to help people and companies to go through this digital transformation. And the basis is technology, of course. As it said, technology is a facilitator in this process. So this is my point, and this is my comment. Thank you.
Thank you,
Good morning, everyone, and greetings from Medellin, Colombia. Well, my panel colleagues have already expressed this very well. Yes, we can do a technology leapfrogging. It doesn't matter if we are at developing or developed countries. I think that the maturity of these new technologies allow us to do so. There is communication among industries, as Roberto said. But yes, definitely we can do this technology leapfrogging, because many of these technologies are sold nowadays as services. So all companies, regardless of their size or their technology maturity, do not need to invest. That money can be used for their business. They pay for technology in the form of a service. And here at Activo Colombia, we're offering such service, and we're working with very small companies, a chain or maybe 3 drugstores to large ones. So taking the example of a small company, 3 branches, a drugstore chain, they want to buy medicine instead of buying a server, the licenses, etc. So I believe that being supplied as a service technology can be very useful, and any company can do this leapfrogging. Now, talking about the new business models, technology is democratized in recent years. Everything that is digitized nowadays has zero value. I ask my colleagues, how much is the cost of a call? Before, we knew, right? When we had that dial phones, we knew exactly how much we paid for each phone call. But nowadays, Spotify, everything that is digitized has zero value. So in summary, yes, we can do this leapfrogging to technology. The new services supplied are helping so that technology can be used by everyone. It is democratized, and it has zero value, everything that is digitized.
Thank you, Marcelo. Maybe I could come back to the panel overall with a couple of points, maybe beginning, and particularly for Silmar, around 5G. Do you think, and I'm not an expert on 5G, but when we hear commentary about the opportunities for self-driving vehicles, for example, the volume of data exchange that's involved is really quite colossal, and with other probably 5G applications too. And I wonder whether this will also involve a major rollout, the need for significant investment, maybe some of it public investment in new physical infrastructure, particularly I'm thinking of fiber optic cable and transmission towers, etc. And what kind of implications will that bring for policy, even regulatory issues? So yeah, if you have any thoughts there.
Yeah, excellent point, Alistair. Thanks very much for your question. Yeah. When it comes to the amount of sites to be deployed to address the 5G demands, we have to think differently. For instance, lampposts. Yeah, nowadays the lampposts, you just use the lights and that's it. We think that in the near future, we're going to have plenty of lampposts with 5G installed in it, but in order to provide 5G coverage in an areas. So nowadays that's not possible, but with 5G now that are going to have to address the demand in small areas, we are already discussing and developing solutions that are going to have our 5G solution, the card, inside the lampposts. Because by doing that, we are going to get all the approval necessary to deploy the amount of sites required. Another point that I'd like to discuss as well is about the fiber optic that you mentioned. Yes, we need to have fiber. However, with millimeter wave frequency band, with 5G, we can also get 5G in areas without having fiber. So it's very technical, but I think it's worth describing a little bit about that. Yeah, 5G is one technology, but I can deploy that technology in different frequency bands. When you go to the millimeter wave, it's the highest frequency band, I have plenty of bandwidth. And by having plenty of bandwidth, we can have a fiber-like connectivity in that site. So that's why 5G is so important, because we can have that technology in different frequency band globally. And therefore, in some areas, we cannot get the fiber to connect the 5G at different frequency bands. I can get in the millimeter wave. Another thing that you mentioned is about the autonomous car. We have two different things there. The connected car is going to actually have to have 5G coverage. However, the connectivity between cars, you don't need to use the same frequency band. It's called CV2X. So it's a different frequency band from the one that you're going to use the car to be connected to the internet, for instance. So we have some sort of flexibility. Yeah? The challenge now is more to do with CV2X rather than the 5G.
Thanks very much, Silmar. That's really helpful. Maybe I can put a question to any of the other panelists who would like to address this. And one is that a number of you have talked about what's required to assist companies in adopting new technology. I wonder that when we're looking at leapfrogging in poorer and middle-income countries, whether you may have a segment of the business population which can move to the use of more advanced technologies. But in terms of the whole ecosystem, the country's business ecosystem, that will, it seems to me, create pressure on more traditional kind of already established constraints on doing business, especially for exporters. For example, if you're looking at digitally integrated supply chains, that just creates an enormous amount of pressure for the ports and the customs hubs, etc., to be ever more efficient. And so I wonder if you kind of, as Industry 4.0 begins to penetrate, what do you think some of these other constraints, these other system bottlenecks are likely to be?
I can take
Sorry,
the question.
a rather long question.
Yeah, I would say one big bottleneck in adopting these technologies, aside of the economical, etc., in spite of the democratization of the technology, is the regulation. And I think there all these centers can make a big difference, right? Because technology is there, but the evolution of the regulatory ecosystem should move as fast as the technology is moving today. I can give you two comments on that. The first one, I am a telecom provider here in Colombia, number 2 telecom provider with millions of customers. And spectrum, as has been discussed in the previous question, is key to push technology across all population. Spectrum costs, spectrum prices, which in Colombia is 5 times higher than the average in Latin America, is key to make this happen. So the government should understand that spectrum licenses, etc., is not more to get money for the government. Is to push the close of the digital gap. So the government should be aware of that. And the second one is, make the regulation go faster in all these technology adoptions. Just take, the electric scooters that are, populating cities and, causing, traffic problems, causing accidents, etc., etc. How is the appropriate usage for each city, for each country, drones, or which height they can fly, etc., etc., etc. So I would say it's very, very relevant that all our regulators in the region understands that the technology is evolving fast and they should move fast with the regulation. Take the outstanding work that these centers are doing in Colombia and Brazil to move faster in regulation.
Very much, Marcelo. I wonder, Roberto, Tulio, would you like to say a word here, or otherwise I'll go on to the next question. Okay.
Eu gostaria de fazer breve comentário. Eu acredito.
I'd like to make a brief comment. I believe it's important when we look at technology in research and development projects and in research and development centers. Often we end up designing a technological agenda that is disconnected with the state. It's increasingly important when we talk about projects that are lower levels that we push forward the envelope to the government and push the government at the federal or local level, bring the government into the discussion and bring in the authorities inside the discussion. Often we end up having this debate at the end, and we have a development in the market that is different from that of the government. We have to create an agenda in which this agenda will be on step with the development, the funding, and the effective use of technology. I believe that then it will be possible to resolve many problems and also see the issues that must be actually regulated. So the more we talk in the beginning of the development of a process of development of new technologies, I believe that we can gain more when the technologies are adopted. I would like to highlight that.
Thank you very much, Roberto. Tulio, would you like to say a word here? Otherwise, I'll move on.
Eu gostaria de comentar assim,
I would like to add a comment. You talked about the regulatory challenge and the research and development, and I would like to raise the issue of education at the short, medium, and long term. If you stop to think of it, companies already have the technology to be used and applied. What often prevents technology to be disseminated and used in my opinion, is often the problem of culture and education. I believe this is a bottleneck to be dealt with by governments, administrations, and I would like also to talk about innovation ecosystems, open education, infrastructure, financing models for technology. All this is linked to education. We're talking about the batteries of the 5.0 industry, which is much more complex that was required before. This requires new competencies and new skills on the part of people. We have a syllabus nowadays that is based on the first industrial revolution. And it's not that time I do not respect the developments of mathematics, chemistry, and others, but for this new revolution that we are proposing, we must take into account other competencies. How are we going to deliver solutions that are easy to use, that are pleasant, that will encourage people to increase value and to add value to things and to be more participative? And this does not follow the hard skills and these subjects that are more traditional in education. This is something that I would like to highlight, and that this is linked to the administrations, to the governments. And I think this is really important, the aspect of education at all levels. And if it's not quite clear, education once again.
Yeah, in my own country, our former Prime Minister, Tony Blair, set out his priorities as education, education, education. So thank you very much, Tulio. And actually, we'll talk about skills in our third question, time permitting. So let's move on then to the second question, and that's that the adoption of artificial intelligence in the business sector overall, including in most large firms, is still very limited, in fact. Although we hear the words AI, the letters AI everywhere, even in countries like Germany, only around 6% of German companies in total are using AI. There was a survey at the end of 2019 in the United States of 60 large manufacturers, companies with an annual turnover of between $500 million to $10 billion. And only 3 actually had mapped systematically where AI could be used in the company. So actual use rates are in core business processes rather than the more peripheral, some minor admin business functions. Core business process use is actually very limited today. So what do you think are the main challenges that companies face, not so much policy this occasion, but at the level of the companies in trying to incorporate AI in particular, as well as some of the other emerging technologies into their core business practices? So this time, maybe we'll begin with Roberto, please.
Obrigado, Alistair.
Thank you very much, Alistair, on this topic. For me, it's quite obvious that we are talking about artificial intelligence with state-of-the-art technology for restructuring, but other technologies that could be brought to the same level and could be talked about as well. And my answer will be structured in 3 parts, 2 directly linked to artificial intelligence, and the third part can cover other emerging technologies. In the first part, I would like to highlight that there's no point in talking about AI algorithms if you do not have the main input. We will have an industry that will be able to use artificial intelligence as the main input, and you can do whatever you want. You cannot turn your back on that. The main input is data. You cannot have AI in production in the market or the understanding of internal or external environments if you do not have a mass of data. This is the basis of artificial intelligence. So companies and industry that want to use artificial intelligence the best possible way must have access to data and a minimal treatment of data to process the AI algorithm. This is the first point that I would like to highlight. This ends up being a hurdle and the first step barrier for many companies. Many of them do not have the technology or the infrastructure to carry out the primal analysis of the data. So there is this issue, input and this barrier at the entry of this data. The second issue I'd like to rate, why should you use AI? What's the reason behind it? And we end up setting AI as a broad, single spectrum, as if it were one technology only, one thing in itself. And I'm not going to talk about algorithms and basic technologies, but I'll talk about applications. When you look at the application of AI, you can have at least 4 layers. The first one is AI of internet traceability, is tracing the understanding of the user, for instance. And this is at the basis, and many companies might be able to use that. We have the services, and small, medium, large companies would be able to use that either to approach the market, to understand their consumers. And this first level of AI is fully mastered. When we talk about the second layer, and we see the specificity of the business, we talk about the AI that is more technical. We talk about health, food, we're talking about AI that's involved in the specialty of the business. And then we have a great opportunity in emerging countries to be working on this AI applied with collaborators to increase productivity, because we're far behind other countries. That's just my second point. When you look at the third level, which is the sensor AI, as we talked about 5G, several pieces of data being processed at the same time, we have a larger service of creation of infrastructure within companies or within our countries that we have to take into account to contemplate going into AI of sensoring. When we have several times of players going to the markets. For these 2 levels of AI, we have a need for infrastructure. We have a gap in infrastructure for emerging countries. All this within the scope of AI that show us that we have 2 opportunities in our hand that could be used, and we have 2 scopes that are a little farther from us due to the necessary infrastructure. I would like to go to the third item in my approach.
Just if you could just wrap it up in. Sorry to cut you off, Roberto. I just want to go around everyone as well. Thank you.
Ótimo. O terceiro item, eu gostaria de fazer.
The third item, I would like to mention of something Tulio mentioned about when he speaks about the setting of a company. I think this is extremely important. There's no point in having technology without having companies that can turn this technology into something usable or pleasant. We have Harvard technology that was able to do that. They made it pleasant. And now I'll give the room to Tulio for him to complement what I've just said. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Roberto. Thank you. Tulio, please.
Obrigado, Roberto. Eu vou complementar aqui.
Thank you, Roberto. Yes, I'll fill in. Roberto talked about AI in the productive process of companies, companies that have problems in their tools and in which these are not very accessible and are still trying to answer questions that in which don't even need AI. So they are in their first baby steps trying to develop the technology. On AI, I would like to talk about AI linked to products. Businesses often have a problem to see how they can improve their product or how they can create a new business model by adding technology or AI to their product. You have plants, for instance, manufacturers. I went to Harvard, where you have a very common product, pillows, and the leadership of the company that was there, I explained to them the possibility of a smart pillow, and they had trouble understanding the concept because the value of the product for them was a good pillow. And You didn't have the bracelets at the time, but the smartwatches. And I had someone in the group who slept with his cell phone under the pillow to see if his sleep was good. So if the leadership is not aligned with what technology and AI can help, they will always be fighting to do what is traditional. And they must understand that they have to change themselves to become an impact company. And they have to change themselves, morph themselves into a company that can generate better products and that will add value. So this is quite a challenge. This is a journey, actually, in which we start with new concepts for the production process, and you have to think ahead. And as for accessibility, as I said, we had to work on 8 items to bring in one technological solution to help small and intermediate businesses to do that forward leap into technology. First, you have to understand the machinery that is present in the Brazilian market. Normally, if you have one technician for the maintenance, how can you install technology if you do not have someone who is trained in information technology? So you need technology that the maintenance technician can implement. When we're talking about IoT, we're talking about constant improvement. So you have to change the organization to be able to extract results from the data. It's not just enough to have to know something, to have the data, but you must be able to work together. You need to have this team, so to speak, working on human intelligence that we are now migrating to artificial intelligence. So we have a faster cycle of communication and working on the evolution of companies. There's also the financial aspect. There's no point of having thousands of dollars of technology implemented to obtain results at the end. Marcelo mentioned the case of the SaaS use. We adapted all that. There are several other items that I think are relevant and that we need to overcome their hurdles. We need companies to put that in their processes. So this we have this accessibility. And I have several articles that I have published, but I'd like to stick to those aspects.
Yeah, thank you very much, Tulio. That's very rich. And Marcelo, I'm also very interested in how AI is being used in telecoms. And so we'd be very interested in hearing your views here. Thank you.
Okay. The first thing that we need to realize is that AI, la inteligencia artificial, voy en español para que sea más fácil. La inteligencia
I'll switch to Spanish to make it easier. AI is something that people see as far off into the future, something that is not real. But the reality is that Gmail, which we use every day, has AI for spam filtering. So we don't have to stick with this idea that AI is something expensive, hyper sophisticated, hyper structured. Everyone, we can all use and work on AI. I would like to highlight 3 things about opportunities. First, we need data. AI without data does not exist. Garbage in, garbage out, as the saying goes, right? So it's really important for any company that wishes to enter AI to have properly structured and cleaned up data to make sure that AI really works. Second, the implementation of AI doesn't have to be isolated. It has to be in line with the company's strategy. It's not that I liked that technology and I'm going to come up with an AI product. No, that doesn't make sense for a company if it's not properly aligned with its strategy, with its business. And as Roberto and Tulio said, with the culture, it has to be data-driven. People have to have that mindset of wanting to do things differently based on data. And third, AI has to improve productivity and competitiveness of the business. The example I always think of about innovations that didn't result in money was Google Glass. Google launched Google Glass. It was spectacular, but it didn't make any money because none of the day-to-day citizens were going to use Google Glass. Google later understood that Google Glass was great for a specific industry, to read barcodes in logistics, for specific machines, and so on. So I have AI in my company, and my company is going to be more successful, more productive? Not necessarily. And as an example to your question, Alistair, in the world of telecoms, we use AI for personalized recommendations of products, as Amazon does, for automation of our services through bots, which is chatbots are fairly commonplace and use AI to respond to customers. Dynamic pricing in our products, in the prepaid cellular cell phone, we have significant penetration in Latin American countries. It's impossible to have a pricing chart. No, instead, pricing has to be assigned dynamically. And in marketing, audience segmentation. So I think AI, in summary, Alistair, we shouldn't think about it as something expensive, super exclusive, things like a chatbot that any company can use today, use AI.
Thank you very much, Marcelo. On this issue of aligning AI with strategy and the need to create a sort of data mindset within companies, I can imagine that a company like yours, for dealing with telecoms, that many of the staff will have a data mindset almost by, they probably wouldn't be hired otherwise, I would imagine. In many traditional industrial companies, however, they are not data-led. Traditionally, they're more product-led, unlike companies in sectors such as finance and insurance and online retail, which have had an experience of working with big data for, at least a decade, probably longer. I wonder if you could maybe tell us a little bit about, in your sector, and maybe what you know from elsewhere about this issue of data mindset.
En el mundo de las telecomunicaciones.
In the world of telecom, since the foundation of all of us is engineering, I'm an engineer myself, that is commonplace. And therefore that data mindset is embedded, as it were. And of course, with the new generations, they have they come already plug and play with the data mindset. People who are starting their career, coming out of college, that are coming on board in our company already have that data mindset. Of course, there's always an internal resistance and, in changing the way we do things. So those of us in leadership need to think of ways to make the company move faster. But I think in the past 5 years at Tigo Colombia, we have been evolving a lot. And when I look 5 years ahead and I look at the kind of professionals coming up in the pipeline, I think that data mindset will no longer be a problem. Instead, it's a matter of ordering the data, of coexisting with legacy systems and using data correctly than not having people with that data mindset.
Thank you very much, Marcelo. Let me just turn to Silmar now and on this question of AI, but perhaps while I'm asking Silmar to intervene, I could also follow up from Marcelo and say that when you're looking at young people with data engineering and machine learning skills, etc., does this mean in terms of organizational structures that more decision-making authority has to be delegated to lower levels, to younger people, perhaps by senior managers who are not so data literate, whose own positions of authority may be weakened in some way? Silmar.
Yes, I agree. It has to be delegated to them. Yeah. Let me give an example about the AI. Someone mentioned about the amount of data required, yeah, in order to use AI. From a technology perspective, you can optimize or even minimize the amount of data by having an edge computer solution. Let me explain exactly one use case. Imagine that you have a camera installed somewhere and you want to get a lot of information out of that camera pull out in an AI database in order to extract what you want. But imagine that instead of pulling out of this data from different cameras, you could have your post-processing in the camera, in each of the cameras. So instead of centralizing all the data, that would stress a lot the infrastructure, I could have the AI functionalities at the far end. So I could resolve what I wanted there. And that's the trend. That's what we are working. So instead of thinking about pulling out data from different sources, why not trying to resolve the issue at the end? And the 5G cameras for that, the ones that are going to come, they're going to help us a lot in doing that.
That's fascinating, computing at the edge and so on. It's, thank you. So we've got 10 more minutes, 9 more minutes now. And let's get to briefly this question of skills, which really underlies everything. And, you know, we know a lot of the work that OECD is doing on skills assessments globally. It all points to the skills, especially with respect to artificial intelligence and advanced programming skills, they're scarce everywhere. They're scarce even in Silicon Valley, in London, and in Shanghai, and so forth. So what do you think are the most important long-term and short-term priorities that governments need to have in terms of developing the right skills base? Maybe I'll begin with Tulio this time. Thank you. And we'll have to be brief here, so maybe 2 minutes maximum. Thank you.
Combinado, Alistair. Hard skills.
Well, thank you. Well, hard skills are definitely the basis for everything. We still have to speak about knowledge, skills, digitalization, electronics, and etc. These are the basics, but this is not the only thing to be taken into account. As I see that in the universities, there is not a discipline for 4.0 industry, and this is not mandatory in engineering courses in Brazil. It is just part of some of the professors that have included in their curriculum. So this is just something that is optional, is a subject that is not mandatory in the curriculum, and then gradually it becomes something mandatory. But this is a transformation that is still going through. But hard skills is something in computing, digitization, etc. is very important. But as I repeat, you know, especially for 4.0 industry, this is something very complex and several soft skills is required. And people have to be trained, and you also have to be doing that in advance. You know, the ability to put up a team. No team will have only one person that will be proficient in everything that is in the stack. So you have to be able to look at the market and add value to what you do. And again, considering the elements of skills, you know, today they are not very much regarded at the same level of traditional skills like mathematics, for example, or arts or design and so forth. But they are key for us to be able to achieve our goals. So hard skills together with knowledge in digital technology, given in every course possible, and also this soft skills combined with specific training that should be mandatory. You know, this mix and the plurality of skills, in my opinion, is what will allow us to move forward in a more adequate way according to the revolution we're seeing.
Thank you very much, Tulio. Let me invite Roberto and also invite all of the panelists to think on this issue of how important the balance of importance between those who arrive at the company door with strong technical skills and the importance of having potential recruits who just show they can learn to learn. The technology is moving very fast, so you want people who have good foundation skills, literacy, numeracy, mathematics, and so on, because they'll keep abreast of the technologies as they change quickly. So please, Roberto.
Legal. Eu vou fazer uma abordagem, eu não vou
Well, I just would like to, I will not speaking about hard skills and soft skills because I do have already covered that very well. I'm speak about different models so that we can really meet the needs. Well, you can see that today in Brazil, on the one hand, we have too many people that are unemployed because they are not skilled. And on the other hand, we have too many vacancies because people are not competent enough or they don't have the adequate skills. And this is a gap for the industry and for the society. And there is only way to solve that. Create several different models. We cannot just focus on only one regular education and university education. Of course, this is something necessary, but we have also to try to provide vocational courses that will requalify people or provide them with different skills. And we also have to see other educational models that we give people with the skills in a faster way. So we should adopt different educational models so that quickly we can have skilled people with the minimal requirements met and be able to work. So we should not only look at the traditional way of education, because of course it has to develop, it has to evolve, but it will not meet all the demand that we have today. So this is why we have to operate in different ways and have different models to be adopted. And we have to be fast in this.
Thank you, Roberto. That's extremely interesting. Let me turn to Marcelo, please.
Thank you, Alistair. I won't cover the areas that Tulio and Roberto already covered. You know, the knowledge, hard or soft skill, the talent, the training, the scientific knowledge that is needed, as Tulio mentioned. Second one is the technology. Technology should be there for us to learn, and, you know, and the government plays a key part on making the technology available to everyone. You know, the regulatory framework, as I mentioned at the beginning, and the money that the country needs, every country needs, you know, to populate the technology, to make it available, not only to the universities, as Roberto was mentioning, but to, you know, to people just studying, you know, finishing school or whatever, to have access to technology. And I just want to emphasize one last point, is the preparation for the future. I mean, you know, the adaptive attitude we need to have, the enterprise agility we need to have, because things are changing so fast. You know, this COVID showed us that we have to adapt very, very quickly, you know, get the vaccine, close everything, open everything, et cetera, et cetera. So I would say, aside of the technology knowledge, the broad capability to put this knowledge across all the people, as Roberto mentioned, and to have the technology available for everyone, we need to keep in mind that we need to have adaptive skills to be able to cope with this, you know, fast changing world.
Thank you very much, Marcelo. So finally, I'll turn to Silma. And maybe Silma, I could ask you, do you, in your company, do you use massive online courses, MOOCs, in trying to upgrade the workforce skills?
That's exactly what I was about to mention, Alistair. Thank you. In a nutshell, there have to be online training, online courses, education. That's what technology can help. Without that, we are not going to succeed. We have to explore that.
Thank you so much, everyone. We've got, I think, about 1 minute before we're due to close. So I just say I've been working in this area for many years, and I've learned something from all of you, and really appreciate your rich interventions. OECD actually is fielding a new international survey of AI in firms, and Brazil will be one of the countries which is included in the survey. So at some point we may touch base with you again. So thank you, Silma. Thank you, Roberto, Tulio, and Marcelo. Great inputs, much appreciated.
Thank you very much.
Bye, thank you for the meeting.
Thank you very much, guys. Thank you.
Bye. Thank you all, guys.
Obrigado.
Thank you.
We would like to thank Alistair and all the panelists, very important contributions. We would like to invite you to keep up the dialogue using the chat rooms we have set up for that purpose. They're going to be enabled throughout the day and tomorrow during our event. Thank you for your participation. Finally, joining us, we have the director of the Colombia Center for Support for Industrial Revolution. Did I pronounce your name correctly? Yes, and he's going to tell us what's going to happen tomorrow when we have the second part of the Congress. Welcome to what is going to happen tomorrow, who's going to be joining us. Today we have a great first.
Thank you very much, Barbara. Thank you for being with us. It is an honor to be with you and have a really high level host like you. Thank you. For tomorrow at 8 o'clock Colombia, 10 a.m. Brazil time, we will begin with the second day of this event. We're going to have a wonderful day. We will begin with Ricardo Jaramillo, President of Colombia, then we will continue with the Mayor of Medellín. He is one of the pioneers in the use of technology and intelligent cities. And then we will have the leader of public policies of Facebook, and we will also have panelists and executives from the World Economic Forum, Amazon, from UNESCO, from Colombia, and other very interesting entities. We'll have two panels that will be very interesting tomorrow. The first one will be regarding the transition of Latin America into a data-based economy, and the other panel will talk about ethical and regulatory frameworks for emerging technologies. So we hope you will have your participation tomorrow. We will have a very interesting day, just like today. Thank you once again for being with us. Thank you so much. Thank you so much. So we have already finished with the first day of the Latin American Congress for the Fourth Industrial Revolution. Tomorrow we'll begin at 8 Colombian time with this agenda that you have heard of, which will help us foster the Fourth Industrial Revolution in Latin America. Thank you.